the article that you mentioned, so that's an op-ed. It's my first op-ed that I have ever written, and it ended up in Newsweek because I don't usually write opinion pieces, but I felt it was really important. And the big thing that I wanted to reach people who, by sharing my story, what I wanted is to reach people who have been noticing similar things or experiencing similar things and were too afraid to speak. And I wanted them not to feel alone. And I also wanted to be able to try and empower them. And honestly, I thought I would have like a very angry mob come after me. And surprisingly, I think for the most part, it was received quite well, which gives me a lot of hope because I think a lot of people are feeling the way that I was feeling and the people who were writing to me were feeling. And I think it did trigger a lot of conversations. And people were saying how they were passing it around to their friends because they were saying that a lot of people are feeling this but are afraid to say it. So that's kind of in a nutshell a large part of the story.
Yeah. Fascinating. It seems I'm seeing over the last 6-7 years, particularly, I'm seeing a lot of parallels. Increasing parallels these days between, I guess, what I would describe as ideological fervor, let's say, from what we used to see from the religious right in the 80s and early 90s to what, but now I'm seeing some distinct parallels in behavior to what we're seeing today coming from certain sectors of, for lack of a better description, the left. Have you made any similar observations?
No, I obviously did. I think it's not that cancellations and things like that aren't coming from the right, as sometimes they are. I do think it's a lot more of a left issue. I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush because my circle is largely left, and whenever I talk to anybody in my circle, as much as they might hate Fox, because it wasn't really about Fox at all. I don't even really like Fox that much, but I think that most people are really much more sane. And I think it's these like very loud voices on, I'm going to call them, I don't know. Oh, somebody I know calls them the intolerant left. Let's call them that because that's what it is really. People use words like cancel culture, but I think it comes down to intolerance. It's an intolerance of viewpoints. And the worst thing it does, like as much as you hear so many stories of people, getting canceled or harassed or these kinds of things happening, more frequently you don't hear the story because what happens is people don't talk, right? They're silenced. They're afraid to express a viewpoint that's not as mainstream or as popular. They're afraid of offending someone. And it really shuts down conversations, which also doesn't serve the agenda, in my opinion, of even the left, because say I said something and it was sort of, I don't know, wrong in some way, morally abhorrent in some way. I'd hope I didn't say something like that, but let's say I did. Well, then my point of view can be challenged and scrutinized, and maybe I will change my point of view, right? And so when you shut people down, that stops. That doesn't happen. So you can't explore points of views. And also, I think there's a lot of dishonesty, right? Because there's a lot of things that people can't say purely because they're afraid, but they're facts. It's kind of like the emperor's wardrobe, right? There's certain things you can't point out. And I know, like, I'm completely afraid myself. I'm trying to be, more free in my speech, and it's kind of a path that I've been on for a while and was kind of accelerated by what had happened. But it's something that has been troubling me for a long time, and I see it so much. And when I started talking more freely, I did it with individuals personally in person, and I found that a lot of people were actually a lot more open to these conversations, even if they disagreed with me. They didn't vilify me for having a particular opinion, and we would just discuss it. And I don't know why we have such a vilification of the other. But something that I've heard that really stayed with me is then if you vilify someone, right, you make them really the bad guy, you call them a racist or a white supremacist or whatnot, then it's acceptable to then hurt them and do bad things to them and potentially even, cause violence because that person is the enemy instead of just an individual that maybe holds a different point of view. And point of views, by the way, change.
Something that I started noticing, much like you, I used to make my living as a recording artist, so much of my social circle that I grew up with was not only left, but far left, what I describe. And I found myself becoming increasingly alienated over the last 8 years from most of my peers, just because I noticed that most of them were following this trajectory that we've been discussing, right? And then by comparison, just through me expressing sentiments of objectivity and following the facts no matter where they lead, no matter which political bias it is associated with, right? Then all of a sudden I became this radical bad guy. You know what I mean? I'm just like, right. Hold the phone here, guys. Like, I haven't really changed that much. Like, y'all are on some new path I didn't sign up for. Have you ever felt that way amongst your peers?
Oh, hugely. I mean, I think a big thing, I think the values that we should really encourage are curiosity and critical thought. And for some reason, again, those have had sort of negative connotations in a way, right? Because if I question something, just because I'm trying to just ask follow-up questions, half the time I'm not even trying to argue anything, or most of the time I'm just following up to really understand something from all points of view. And even in my as I'm trying to collect facts, it seems to offend something in people, and that's frustrating. And I've also noticed a lot of in my experience, I had a lot of ostracizing as a result of some of the stuff that happened, but also I had I don't know how open I can be about this, but like something else was happening that wasn't quite 100% connected, but somebody was like making up blatant lies. And watching people just not even bother to ask questions and just kind of like literally ostracize someone else, just to fit in, really.
Right.
I don't even think they had a personal vendetta against me. I think they were just trying to fit in and not be called out like someone who defended me was. And they saw that happen. They didn't want to be the next target, and so they fell in line. And that is so dangerous. And this is something that I'm, and back to sort of your question, I think critical thinking is something that is the antidote to a lot of these issues, and it's something that should really be applied to everything, especially, I think journalism. I think journalists should be able to look into that. I think it's something that should be a really big part of our education system and in high school or elementary school, because not just critical thought, but I would also say independent thought. And maybe that's even a bigger thing in some ways, because I think the fear of not falling in line is so huge. And I talked to a few people recently where we do have ways of like being very critical, analytical about how we approach things, and we don't sort of fall in line. And we sort of realized that we were all felt sort of like outsiders growing up.
Yeah.
So there's something kind of connected with that, being somebody who's capable of independent thought and being somebody who is who feels like outside, not accepted. There is some connection there, but I think it's more important to encourage that independent thought than having the right answers or be given the answers, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that would be one of the primary foundational objectives of educators, but as we've been seeing, that's far from the case. I from what we're seeing, particularly on a lot of college campuses, is a distinct rise of and this is something that has been happening for a while, but basically activist professors rather than just professors. And I just don't see how this is genuinely helpful for people in developing their critical thinking skills. Your thoughts?
Yeah, this seems to be happening the most on college campuses because the most cancellations that I've been hearing about seem to happen there.